Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Do I start this time? So my name is Cherie Aimee. Like Dr. Harnia said, I am a 10-year cardiac arrest survivor. I'm also a 10-year, or probably 11-year now, cancer survivor. So I'm both. It's been an honor to number one, be invited here today to speak alongside all of the doctors, medical researchers, scientists, and to hear the behind the scenes of what it took to save my life. I have to admit, it's a little weird at the same time to, I know my version of the story, right? But to hear really how much goes into bringing somebody back from cardiac arrest is absolutely incredible. So I just want to share my story, and I have a big message at the end of my story that I think is very, very important. So it was the spring of 2010. I was about 10 months out of my last chemotherapy treatment for Hodgkin's lymphoma. I had been given 12 rounds of chemotherapy. There's 4 different medicines that I was treated with, and one of them actually has a history of possibly causing heart failure. I was definitely checked for that over the course of the 10 months, but what happened to me came on pretty suddenly. I had about 3 weeks of having trouble breathing, in which I went to the local emergency room, but the correct tests really weren't run on me. I was in my early 30s, and even though I just had chemotherapy, I looked very healthy, I looked young, and sometimes these things are just overlooked. And so I went home, and I still, for about the next 3 weeks, had difficulty breathing. And there was one morning where my husband found me walking down the hallway where I was complaining of both of my arms feeling heavy. And he immediately rushed me to the emergency room of my local hospital. But on the way there, he actually called my local cardiologist, who I'm going to refer to as Dr. X, just for reference, because his name is going to come up a lot. He happened to be on call, which was very, very rare, because he was the chief of cardiology of the hospital. And I believe this was a weekend. So first miracle was that he happened to be on call. He said to my husband to bring me to the emergency room, to rush me there, and that he would meet us there. We arrived into the emergency room. I was whisked away into a room where this is the one part I remember of that day, and that is that the nurse wanted me to lay down on the hospital bed so that she could put the IV in. And I remember saying to her, I can't lie down because I'm having trouble breathing. And she said, no, it'll just be for a couple of seconds. I said, okay. And I laid down, and I immediately could not breathe. And I remember my husband standing in front of me, and I reached up my arms and I said, help me up, help me, help me, help me, I can't breathe. And he came over and he helped uplift the upper part of my body. And at that point, according to my father, my eyes rolled back into my head and my heart had stopped. Now, I was not attached to any monitors at the time, and the nurse who was putting in the IV was getting everything prepared, so she had her back to me and didn't realize that I had flatlined. So my family let her know, and immediately, by the way, something's not right here. And immediately a code blue was issued, and again, from what I'm told, it was organized chaos. at the time that I flatlined and there was a code blue issued, it happened to also be the exact time that Dr. X, my cardiologist, had come running into the emergency room. CPR was immediately administered, and they would get my heart to start, and then it would stop again. So what was happening was it wouldn't stick. And so after about, 10 to 20 minutes, the medical staff decided to call my time of death. And now with Dr. X in the emergency room, he happened to be the one doctor in the entire emergency room that refused to give up. And I want you to really understand that he was the only one, because the hospital had never seen anything like a crash like mine. And then for the chief of cardiology to say, keep going, no one actually knew what to do. So with him, again, in the words of my father, Dr. X performed like a drill sergeant, and he ordered every single person in that emergency room and told them exactly what to do, because everyone had actually frozen up. They didn't know. So he instructed this person to do that, this person to do that person get back on her and continue with the chest compressions. And they continued these chest compressions for over 90 minutes. And they did this long enough where they eventually took me into the operating room, and they were ordered to continue with the chest compressions long enough for Dr. X to install the ECMO. Once the ECMO was installed, the oxygen was now able to get to my organs, except there was no heartbeat. So at this point, I'm now in obviously a coma, and no heartbeat, and on the ECMO. So Dr. X pulls my family aside and says, she's on the ECMO, but there's really nothing more we can do for her in this particular hospital. And by a miracle, he happened to also teach once a month down at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia University Medical Center here. And a few calls were made, and the cardiothoracic team eventually sent their head of cardiothoracic surgery and the surgical team up via ambulance to get me. As soon as they arrived, and mind you now, to give you timing, this is now the next day. I don't understand that, but I think you guys probably understand that more than I. But this is how many hours now has gone by. So they come up and get me, they hook me up to their ECMO, take me back down via ambulance, where they called my husband and said, follow us down, and do we have your permission to perform open heart surgery on your wife? Now, just to set the stage from my family's perspective, they did not realize at this time that I had no heartbeat. So they're just kind of thinking, oh, she's fine. I mean, she was just fine like a second ago. She just had trouble breathing. So even though like New York Presbyterian Hospital came up to get me, my husband was thinking maybe they're just taking her down there to give her a pacemaker. So that's kind of the mental state of my family at this time, that I had no heartbeat and was on ECMO. So he's shocked, but gives the okay to perform open heart surgery. and I was immediately rushed into the OR upon arrival at Newark Presbyterian Hospital, where records definitely show there was no atrial and no ventricle movement with my heart. They performed open heart surgery on me for 16 to 18 hours, which was a very long time from what I was told. And when I came out, I was attached to a central mag, as well as the ECMO, and I was still in very critical condition, but they could not find out during the open heart surgery why my heart wouldn't restart. So while I was out of surgery, I still had no heartbeat. It's never easy to tell this story. So there was one point where I was bleeding out of my pores, and they could not figure out why I just wouldn't stop bleeding everywhere. And it turned out that during the CPR, my lungs were punctured, and so I had internal bleeding. And it took them a little bit to figure out that that's where the bleeding was coming from. So they stopped airflow to my lungs and immediately put me on a ventilator. And I remained on the ventilator, the ECMO, the Centromag, and just trees of medicines and fluids, pretty much for the next 3 months, in a coma, in and out of a coma. And it was really unknown if I would survive. And, you know, if I did survive, what would be the damage? So during that time, I remember being in isolation. I remember having C. diff and just all these things. Everything that could go wrong went wrong. And when I tell you my family did not know if I would survive for at least 2.5 months, it was tough. They were told by the staff and by the cardiothoracic surgeons that they felt that I had a fighting chance, and they felt with the latest and advanced technology and resuscitation that I could pull through. They were very, very optimistic with my family, and now that I know them now, you know, they've told me a little bit more about how nervous they were, but they were very, very positive with my family, which was huge because, you know, my family didn't understand the ECMO, they didn't understand the central mag. I mean, it looks, yeah, the patient looks very scary when you walk in there. Their chest isn't moving because their lungs are shut off. So from that standpoint, someone had mentioned the chaplain help, and you know, there were therapists involved. So it's a big deal for the family and the patient. And so I stayed in that coma, like I said, for about 2.5 months. Miraculously began showing signs of improvement, and I was then implanted with an LVAD, which is a left ventricular assist device, to replace the Centromag. So the LVAD was what I would be able to go home with instead of having to be in the hospital because you can't go home on the Centromag. So they implanted the LVAD, and my heart started showing. It was still weak, but it started. At some point, the beating started, and the LVAD just helped to assist it. And so I was on that, and then slowly weaning off life support took about another month, month and a half. And I slowly moved my way up the ranks in the hospital floors, showing signs of recovery, and eventually did my 2 weeks in physical rehab. Now, the recovery was intense. I mean, clearly, I was bedridden for, 4 months I was bedridden. So 2 weeks of physical therapy isn't enough. But the recovery was excruciating. It was very, very hard. It was hard to go home in an LVAD. But after 5 years, I went home for about 4.5 years, and the LVAD allowed me to regain my strength. Believe it or not, I actually used to go to yoga with my LVAD. And I got back in shape in time for me to be listed for a heart transplant. And then in 2014, I had my heart transplant. And I was actually put on the ECMO once again after the heart transplant. That's a whole other story. But the ECMO has saved my life twice. And the last part I really want to just share that's really important is a couple of things. I went back and I asked Dr. X, the original doctor, and I asked him, I'm confused. I really don't understand how I'm still alive. You hear all the time somebody has cardiac arrest, and why was my life spared, and why did this other hospital come up and get me? Why did so many doctors work to save my life? Like, it's really mind-blowing. And he said to me that he just knew he could bring me back. I said, really? But no one else in that emergency room wanted to continue with CPR. And he said, I just knew I could bring you back. And so for me, it's really important to understand that patient-doctor advocacy in that room. I would not be sitting here today if it wasn't for that one doctor that was just I don't know, I think we can bring her back. I'm not a doctor, so I don't even know what goes into making that decision. But what I do know is that this doctor took a chance, and for whatever reason, he took that chance on me, and I'm still here, and I'm not brain dead. And I've been on national TV, I've been sharing my story, I do a lot in the tech field. It's almost as if none of that ever happened. So, just imagine how many other patients may be saved, number one, if CPR was extended for over 20 minutes, like for me, 90 minutes or more. And number two, if they were placed on ECMO. And number three, like I was, maybe that hospital couldn't save me, but I was sent to a hospital with the top cardiothoracic care. So it's one of my missions to just share my story with all different types of people, patients, but mostly doctors and medical staff, so that you guys can see, you saw all the data today on the PowerPoint presentations, but here, I'm like the living proof of everything you've been talking about today. And that's why you do what you're doing. Because by saving my life, I get to save that much more by promoting ECMO, by promoting extended CPR, and promoting organ transplant, and the LVAD. So thank you guys so much.